This is the book that I've been writing for a long time, and the introduction, the preface, is called My Story, or Why It Has Taken Me Over 30 Years to Write This Book. And I'm not kidding. Now, my son works in an office in London, and one of his young colleagues said to him one day, "I've just heard the most amazing thing. It's called a basic income. Have you heard of this?" And he said, "Well, actually, I grew up with it." So the fact that I've been involved in this debate for 30 years, often in the background, but he knows all about it. So yes, he had heard of it. Anyway, I'm going to read you a little bit of my story so you can see how I came into this debate. So my story, or why it has taken me over 30 years to write this book. I think that I must have become a feminist at the age of about 8, when I realized that my mother did not have any money of her own, but had to ask my father for every penny, even to buy him a birthday present. He was kind and gentle, but inevitably he controlled the money. My next experience was in the mid-1960s, when as a young married working woman who believed that marriage was a way of proving how mature and responsible I was, I received my first tax return. This stated that if you were a married woman, you must pass your tax return to your husband for him to fill in on your behalf. Some of you may remember this. It's certainly, obviously, part of my living memory. For which you would have to tell him any financial secrets that you may have had, and the reciprocal of which was not required. He was not required to tell me any of his financial situation. And of course, any tax rebates that I had earned would be paid to him. And anyway, I was the one who carried out the financial administration for us both. So I was an angry young woman. I assumed that, as a working married woman, in the period between jobs when I had no earnings, I would be eligible for unemployment benefit. However, I was rejected on the grounds that I had made myself unemployed by resigning from my school teaching post at the end of the school year, which of course was the responsible thing to do, not try and hang on for an extra month's payment. And this left a month before my next job started. I was told that it was up to my husband to keep me. I was incensed. I had not included the possibility of being a financial dependent into my vision of happy marriage. At that time, a married woman could elect to have separate assessment for taxation on her earnings, but not on any other income, like interest on bank savings or rental income for those who had it. This remained the case until married couples became entitled to be taxed separately, starting in the fiscal year 1990 to 1991. That is not all that long ago, since the well-off women who could earn enough to pay tax on it were given the courtesy of independent taxation. I didn't think much of either the Social Security or the income tax systems after these experiences, especially for married women, and started thinking about alternatives. I remember talking about the concept of a social dividend with a friend over breakfast one morning in 1990, who pointed me in the direction of Henry George's Progress and Poverty, which was not exactly basic income, but was an introduction to thinking about other things. He, of course, recommended a land value tax, which I still think would be an excellent thing to introduce. In the mid-1970s, my husband and I separated. People asked why I got married in the first place, since I knew what I'd be letting myself in for. But obviously I was ignorant. So I wanted to explore where it said in the marriage laws that women have to be treated as second-class citizens. So I bought a copy of the Marriage Act, which turned out to be a leaflet merely stating who could marry whom, where, and by whom. I noticed that it said Chapter 15 on the front, so I returned to Her Majesty's stationery office and asked for the rest of it. The man laughed and explained that Chapter 15 referred to the fact that it was the 15th piece of legislation going through Parliament that year. So I asked how I could find out about how the marriage laws determined the role of women in marriage. He opened a thick tome, which was an index of all the Acts of Parliament, and looked up marriage. There followed several pages, each comprising 3 columns in small print, listing acts of marriage affected or was affected by. It seemed that the only way in which people could learn in advance to what they were committing themselves was to do a 3-year PhD on the subject. When men and women could commit to matrimony, they rarely know what the contract says. Not only that, but the small print can change over time too. The key lies in the fact that the marriage contract is not a contract between the husband and wife, as many assume. It is between the couple and the state, in which the couple agree to aliment, that's a good Scots word meaning to feed, or in this case to maintain each other, relieving the state from the responsibility of having to support the poorer partner. But at the same time, it deprives the poorer partner from any state benefits unless the other partner agrees to a joint application. In this condition lies the bane of married women. Now, I think you can see from this that I came into the basic income debate through the feminist route, but I have developed from there and examined the social security system, and I think the current system needs a lot of reform, and the income tax system too. One other piece of practical information. I've got leaflets here which contains much of the information I shall be talking about, and I'll give them out at the end, but if anyone has to leave early, please feel free to come and take one on your way out. So where do we start? For me, the question is, as we asked ourselves during the referendum debate, what sort of society do we want to create for ourselves and future generations? And when I look at the present society, this is not where I want to be. What sort of society do I want? Now, the things that a social security system can affect can be listed as follows. This is on the leaflet, but I'll read them out now. What I would like is for each person to be valued for his or her own sake, not for the work that they do or the wealth they own. A basic income grants financial privacy and autonomy. Financial independence emancipates and empowers adults, reduces unequal power relationships, and gives more choice over life decisions. And that's very important. People should have choice over their own lives. Secondly, a basic income can help to prevent, or at least reduce, income poverty and provide financial security. In the long run, it could increase well-being in terms of security, health, and educational opportunities, helping people to develop to their full potentials. Thirdly, a basic income could help to redistribute income and heal our divided society. But by itself, it would not reduce all that much the inequalities between rich and poor, men and women, and geographically. For this to be achieved, it would have to be financed by a restructured, fairer income tax. Eventually, the basic income, the restructured income tax, would help to create a united and inclusive society. Fourthly, non-means testing of benefits restores the incentive to work for pay provided by the wage rate, reducing the current high marginal deductions from potential earnings. Because if someone who's unemployed or on part-time work tries to increase their earnings to get out of poverty, not only do they have income tax deducted and their national insurance contributions, but all the benefits they have, their withdrawal rates are aggregated, and all of those are withdrawn at the same time. And even the government admits that someone in this situation could face a marginal deduction rate, an effective tax rate of 96%. 96%. That means that you keep 4% in every pound you earn, or at the current national living wage of £7.50, you keep 30 pence an hour. Now, what sort of incentive to work is that? I think it's terrible. I mean, most people don't actually face the 96% withdrawal rate. More like it's only 75 to 85. Notice the ironic only. If people are facing that rate, and yet the highest rate of tax facing wealthier people are either 40% and 2% national insurance contributions for people who earn roughly 40,000 or over, and 45% tax rate and 2% national insurance contributions for those earning, I say earning, I mean do they earn? They get for themselves £150,000 a year. They pay 45% tax and 2% national insurance. This is a very regressive system where poorer people pay a far higher rate of effective tax than the richer people. That cannot be fair by anyone's measure. So not means testing benefits would help self-employed people, small companies and workers' cooperatives, and could lead to increased creativity. A basic income can reduce the inequality of power relations in the workplace, and workers and their representatives can negotiate for reasonable pay and better working conditions. The system would work well for either a full employment economy, if we ever get back to one, which I think is unlikely, or one affected by loss of jobs via automation and technological change. In other words, it could lead to more efficient and flexible labour markets. At the moment, our labour markets are flexible according to the employer, but not to the employee. This would help to redress the balance a bit. The last thing that a basic income could contribute to, it could help to simplify the administration of the social security system, reducing the risk of fraud or error by either recipient or staff. It should also reduce the current time-consuming personal effort and stress required to apply for benefits. Eventually, it could lead to a more transparent and accountable system. And one of the interesting things about this is that this set of objectives appeals to people both on the left, obviously, and to people on the right. People on the right like the idea of efficiency, they like the idea of people having choice and so on. So they're not necessarily against it. They might balk at the redistribution aspect, but there's enough there to talk about to get some sort of consensus between left and right. Now, that's the sort of society that I would like to belong to, and we don't have that at the moment. Now, let's just think how we define a basic income and how this can help to bring this about. Now, when you have things like means-tested benefits, there are 4 aspects where you have a choice. So, for instance, if you think of the unit of assessment or delivery of a benefit, it could either be a single person, an individual, or it could be a couple, or in some cases it could be a household. And this choice is actually very relevant. If it should be the individual, this is the fairest way. So if you have it as the couple, then the poorer partner is very dependent on the wealthier partner for making application. And not only that, sometimes the benefit is only paid to one person. And again, this can be very difficult. If you take the example of universal credit, then it's all computerized, and if one partner is working more in their job, maybe doing overtime, the amount of universal credit that the other partner might get is going to vary. So there's no way that they can budget over a time period because it's all variable. It's absolutely crazy. In fact, Paul Spicker, whom some of you heard a fortnight ago in his latest book, says that universal credit is an example of how the people who designed it went through all the social security benefits and picked out the worst aspects of all of them and put them into universal credit. He was very uncomplimentary about it, and there's lots of things to be uncomplimentary about. So anyway, the individual basis or couple, obviously it should be the individual. Anything else is just not fair. It should also be universal to everyone. Now, at the moment, the social security system is targeted on poor people, and it is claimed that this protects them. But no, it doesn't. That's just a myth. It helps them to be segregated, to be stigmatized, humiliated in the press, and have a feeling of rejection. This is not the way to treat our most vulnerable people. And so one of the good things about it being universal is that if it's given to rich people, even though they appear not to need it, but it can be clawed back from them through the tax system, if they think they're going to benefit, they will protect it. In the same way that the NHS is universal, and although it is being dismantled to some extent, on the whole, rich people have benefited. I mean, imagine rich people having to be means tested for their hip replacement. I think they would soon realise the advantage of it being universal. So if it's universal, they will actually protect it, not just for themselves, but for poor people as well. And as I say, you can claw it back from the rich people through the tax system. But also there's an efficiency argument, because at the moment people are being means tested through the income tax system, and then they're means tested again for the benefits. This has to be inefficient. So just tax them or assess them once for their income tax and just give everybody the same, or they know exactly what they're going to get according to age, and you don't have to keep checking up on them. Now it just follows from what I said, the amount would not be means tested, either on the recipient's own income or wealth, or on that of another family member or household member. And it's non-selective. That means that people who are equally eligible, on the whole, would get the same amount, but it can be selective by age. In other words, we usually assume that children will get less than working age adults, and depending on how generous the system is, at the lower end, pensioners tend to get more, but as you go through the system, it can end up with the working age people getting a higher basic income than pensioners, because it's reckoned that they need more to get themselves to work and things like that. So they could be the same, or one could have more than the other, but it could go either way. One thing I should say is that we cannot include an element for housing cost in a basic income at the present time. And that's nothing to do with the basic income being inferior or inadequate. It is totally to do with the housing policy which has been followed for the last 4 decades, both by Tories and by New Labour. And that housing policy is based on the fact that they encourage people with money to invest in housing as a speculative investment, not to treat it as homes. And this has had the result of housing bubbles, of increasing costs, housing costs and rents all over the country, both for would-be owner-occupiers and for renters across the country. And whilst it's so variable, both over region, but even variable within one place, there's no way we could have a sensible element for housing cost that would make sense. Either in one place you could buy a mansion, or in another, in London or even in Edinburgh, the amount that we could add would leave a lot of poor people still inadequate for paying their rent. So at the moment we're going to have to retain a housing cost benefit, a housing benefit system, but I would like to see it individualised so that people get an amount suitable for their circumstances, but not the whole household. Everyone would get it for their own household, their own circumstances. And similarly, people with disabilities would get the basic income, but then they have their own needs tested system. It's not a means tested on the whole. Services may be, but the actual benefits tend to be needs based, or it used to be. I know it's been boundaried since, but they would have to have an additional separate system which meets their needs. And I would like to see the disability benefits being reformed in the same way. I don't have experience of this, but I hope that if we had a basic income system, it might make it easier for people with disabilities to make suggestions. Well, in fact, there's a commission going on at the moment in Scotland on for people to recommend what they would like the disability benefit system to be like. Maybe a bit limited at the moment with the devolved powers that the government has. And similarly, childcare provision would also have to be separate because it's so variable across the country and for people's circumstances. Now, the last condition for basic income is that it should be unconditional. There will be no extra conditions placed on people to apply for it, to get it. Once you're in the system, it's there. If you decide you want to wait longer between jobs, that's fine. No one's going to make you go for the next job that's available. No one's going to sanction you. This is your right. This gives you financial security and gives you more choice over your life, more control over your life, over your use of time. Now, governments and some people say, won't that mean that people won't want to work? Well, it depends on the situation. I don't think the sort of basic income that we're going to be able to afford, certainly to begin with, is going to allow people to live a life of luxury. It will cover basic needs for things like food, clothing, alcohol and tobacco, some leisure pursuits, insurances, housing costs, not housing rent itself, but things like when you need repairs and so on. And so it's not going to provide the luxuries. So people would still have an incentive to work. But even if that were not true, all the evidence shows that people actually want to work. Work gives a lot of benefits. Work gives you not just earnings, but it gives you a chance to make friends with people. It gives you a structure for your day, and some jobs even have job satisfaction. Well, that's all right for some people. What about the jobs that don't give satisfaction? The horrible drudge jobs? Well, if I were someone who was contemplating being a lavatory cleaner and it would pay the living wage of £7.50, I'd think, don't really fancy doing that. Mind you, if they put it up to £12 an hour, yeah, I'd think about it. So the effect of this, if enough people did this, then the wage rates of these drudge jobs would have to increase. And if people weren't prepared to pay for them, they would either have to go without or automate them. And there's some jobs that are quite difficult to automate. But I think it could mean that you would get a fairer system of wage rates. On the other hand, when you have nice jobs, there could be a lot of competition for them. And so some of the better jobs, the better paid jobs, the wage rates could fall. I don't know what's going to happen, but there's certainly going to be some changes. There's no evidence that people actually want to give up work if they can get a decent job that fulfills their needs. With the present marginal deduction rate, which leaves the effective wage rate, if it's not high enough, people have a natural wage at which they will do a certain job. So for me, lavatory cleaner might be £12 an hour. That's my reservation wage. If it goes up more than that, I will do the job. If it's below that, I'm not going to look at it. And we all have a reservation wage for a particular job. And the net wage rates that most people are facing at the lower end of the market are too low. And just by getting rid of the means-tested benefits, it will increase people's net wage rates, and we could see a lot more people wanting to actually get into the labour market and having the opportunity to do so. That's probably the biggest fear of a government, that if you have a basic income, everyone will give up work and become free riders. They will surf all day on sea, sun and sand and just be free riders. Actually, to be a surfer, you need to be quite well off because the equipment is jolly expensive, and then you have to travel around to all the good places. So I don't think it would be the surfers who are the free riders in this. Finally, the basic income would be delivered regularly and automatically to those who qualify, including the responsible parent of a dependent child, as now. We talk about a full basic income, which is enough for a dignified, if modest, standard of living, enable participation in society for a single person, and a partial basic income would need to be topped up by other income, usually earnings, and a child would receive a child basic income. So that's quite a lot of information to give you if you're new to the idea. Although we use the term universal means it belongs to the universe, so obviously it's a bit of a stretch of imagination. For a universal system, you have to define your population. And in Citizens Income Trust, we've used the idea that people should have the legal right to reside, and that they probably will have had to have resided in this country for a minimum period, and that how much that is a political question. I would also say that anybody who receives it, whether a UK national or from elsewhere, they should reside in this country while they're receiving it. For instance, they can't just sign on each year and swan off to the south of France or to Romania, where they'd probably lord it over the locals. They should be staying here, contributing to the economy which has nurtured them. But they could have, I would suggest they should be in the country for 10 months every year. That gives them 2 months to go on holidays. If it was 2 months end-to-end on 2 years, that gives them 4 months to go off to Australia for a visit or whatever. But they should be located in this country while they're receiving it. But on the other hand, I like the idea of an international basic income. So, for instance, there have been some pilot experiments in Namibia and in India, where they're very poor people. In Namibia, there were some people living on less than a dollar a day. And when they had the 2-year experiment, it found that it had an effect on all sorts of ways. For instance, people, their health would improve because they could buy better nutrition. If they went to the market, they could save up for the fare better. The children were healthier. The children were able to go to school for longer periods. They were able to buy them uniforms. They were doing better at school. It had fantastic effects. Now, if some of the wealthy countries, like ourselves, could organise to have a basic income paid to the individual as part of our responsibility to other countries, our overseas aid, it could have a fantastic effect. And I recognise that a lot of immigrants are reluctant immigrants. They would much rather stay in their own countries and help to develop their countries if they had the opportunity. And this is a way in which they could help to develop their own skills, their own industries and so on, and build up their economies. So I would like to see that happening. We're a long way off. We haven't even got it in this country. In India, where they had these pilot experiments, all sorts of things happened. For instance, there were some families who gathered together and bought their relatives out of bonded labour. There were other people who clubbed together and bought a sewing machine so that they could make their own clothes and some extra to sell. There was one tribe that set up a fish farm, and that increased their own diet. And these were things that lasted even after the experiment had continued. But all the evidence says that if you put money into an economy, that people do know how to use it. They don't just waste it. Before these experiments, people say, oh, they're just idle, or they'll drink it away. In the Namibian experiment, the local people got together, and when this benefit was being administered, they had got all the local alcohol shops to shut for that day, to make sure that no one could go off and drink it away. They were very responsible, and it was in their own interest. And I think that any place, I mean, I don't know why the government don't invest in the northern powerhouses, in Scotland. Just imagine that if deprived areas had this generation investment in people, then it would create a local demand, and it would get the local economy thriving again. It would take time, of course, but it just gives so much hope. I don't think much of the social security system or the income tax system. And what I tend to say is that the income tax and national insurance contributions could be merged into one system. Secondly, I don't know if you're aware of all the tax loopholes that come under income tax and national insurance contributions. Now, one of the worst examples of these is that someone who is earning over £150,000, for instance, could invest up to £40,000 into a registered pension scheme, and they would get their maximum rate of interest, sort of tax relief on that. So, for instance, someone earning over £150,000 could invest £40,000 in a registered pension scheme and get tax relief at the rate of 45%. In other words, they would get £18,000, I'll say that again, £18,000 free windfall from the government for the privilege. Whereas there are lots of people who don't even get the claim pension credit because it's a mean-tested benefit with all the humiliation that goes with that. And how can you get anything more unfair than that? I think that is one of the major injustices in both the tax system and the social security system. Should the taxpayer subsidise these rich people to get a pension to make them even richer? There's nothing stopping them to invest in their own pension schemes, but they don't need taxpayers to invest them, to subsidise them, is what I would say. That doesn't seem to me to be at all fair. Now, if you take the social security benefits and what they call tax expenditures, or sometimes they call it tax welfare, if you take those together, you've got an enormous pool of benefits that could be spread around everyone. So, for instance, in the last year I've got figures for, of 2014 to 15, then the social security budget was £266 billion, but the tax expenditures mounted to almost as much, at 235 billion. Now, if you can add those together and share that round more equally among people, you could get a much fairer system. But then I would say that would be my restructured income tax. The tax and national insurance contributions are merged. The tax loopholes would be got rid of. You'd ask the question, are these tax expenditures, are the tax loopholes good? Are they in the public interest? If not, why are they there? Do we need them? They could be justified. For instance, charities do a lot of good work that the government would like to encourage. But at the moment, it's subsidised through gift aid, which is a very complicated system where only people who pay tax can take advantage of it. A much simpler system would be that each year every registered charity would have a 25% increase in their income as a donation from the government. So it'd just be paid very simply to every charity. And you wouldn't have to have it as a tax expenditure. Tax expenditure is a hidden subsidy for richer people, for taxpayers. Taxpayers are less than half the population. They are by definition. Even if you're only just into above the personal allowance, you fall into the richer half of the population. And the next condition I would have is that I would have everybody paying the same rate of tax on all sources of income. At the moment you pay less, I think is it on interest or dividends? Dividends, you pay 10%. On everything else you pay 20% as a standard taxpayer. Why the difference? It should be considered at least. And then I would hypothecate it. That means I would ring fence it. And all the revenue from this system I would use to pay for the basic income, any retained benefits that we keep, any administrative costs, and it would be a self-contained system, and it would create a discipline because there'd be pressure for the government to increase the benefit level, the basic income level, and there'd be another pressure to reduce the tax rate. So you get a discipline within the system, which you don't get if you spread it around and have other sources of income. This is not to say you can't have other sources of income contributing to it, but this would be my starting point. So the benefit system and the tax system are like reverse sides of the same coin and should be considered together. There are people do suggest other types of taxation to finance a basic income, but they've all got pros and cons. So even income tax has got pros and cons. But I still think that it comes out as the best source, partly because it's the only tax that will actually redistribute from rich to poor. None of the other taxes do it so effectively. And secondly, it's the income, it's the tax which raises the most revenue on its own. It's the only tax combined with national insurance contributions that could raise enough revenue to meet the sums involved in this. The justification for a basic income. How can we justify having any income maintenance system? Well, the first reason is to do with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, medical care and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. That seemed to work when we had full employment, but now that we don't have full employment and there's very much more precarious employment, we need to invoke that more in a way that is suitable for the current economy. And Thomas Paine, whom you may have heard of, who contributed to the USA Constitution, he argued that the land and natural resources belong to the whole people. And since land has been appropriated for private use, the owners owe a rent to the whole excluded population. A 2005 World Bank study concluded that most of the nation's wealth derives from intangible capital, that is, from human capital, and the quality of institutions, especially the rule of law. The wealthier the nation, the more this is so. And in fact, one economist called Herbert Simon, an American, worked out that 90% of the wealth of a community was due to this intangible assets and the institutions, and therefore could justify 95% tax. Now, I don't go anything like that far, you'll be relieved to hear. And then finally, John Donne said, "No man is an island." We all are dependent on many others, and our decisions and actions affect other people. Thus, we are interdependent, and therefore we could claim that we are mutually responsible for each other. It's not a matter of each out for themselves and below everyone else. It's all a matter of what sort of society do we want to create for ourselves and for future generations. And I would claim that the values engraved on the Scottish mace of wisdom, justice, compassion and integrity, together with a basic income scheme, would transform our society from one of fear of despair to one of compassion, justice, trust and hope. I think I should end it there. Thank you very much. I'm sure there are more questions. I'm going to choose and ask one myself, because you